Imagine waking up inside the world of your favorite fantasy novel. For most people, that sounds like a dream come true.
You'd expect to be the legendary hero wielding a holy sword, the brilliant mage uncovering lost circles of magic.
Or at the very least, a wealthy noble with a harem of beautiful followers.
But for Kai Ran, reality didn't just bite, it swallowed him whole.
He wasn't the protagonist. He wasn't the rival. He wasn't even a named villain.
When Kai Ran opened his eyes after a sudden, tragic accident in the real world, he found himself staring at the damp, rotting wooden ceiling of a dilapidated warehouse. He was now Rowan Vale. And if you've read the epic fantasy novel The Last Hero of El Arion as many times as Kai had, you'd know exactly who Rowan Vale is. He is a nameless extra, a low-level warehouse guard in a backwater border town who exists for exactly 3 paragraphs in Chapter 1. Only to be brutally slaughtered during a bandit raid to show how dangerous the world is. He is the definition of fodder, the ultimate NPC. Welcome back to the channel, where today we are diving into a story of absolute defiance against fate. This is the tale of a man who refused to be a footnote in someone else's legend. This is Reborn as the weakest NPC, but I can steal the hero skills. The transition from being a modern-day office worker to a starving, scrawny guard was jarring. Kai, now Rowan, sat up, his bones aching and his stomach growling with a hunger he had never experienced in his previous life. He looked at his reflection in a puddle of dirty water on the floor. The face staring back was pale, gaunt, and utterly unremarkable. In the novel, the hero, Kale Draven, was described as having hair like spun gold and eyes that held the spark of divinity. Rowan, on the other hand, had the kind of face you'd forget the moment he walked out of a room. But Rowan didn't have time to mourn his lost good looks. His mind raced through the plot of the novel. If his memory served him right, and as an obsessive fan, it definitely did, the Night of Red Steel was supposed to happen tonight. That was the night a group of desert bandits would infiltrate this very outpost, kill everyone in their sleep, and steal the supplies. Setting the stage for the hero to eventually track them down and look like a savior, Rowan was scheduled to die in approximately 6 hours. Despair began to claw at his chest. How could he survive? He had no mana, no sword training, and the body of a man who looked like he'd collapse if he sneezed too hard. But just as he was about to give up, a sharp, crystalline sound echoed in his mind. It wasn't the sound of the world, it was something deeper. System initialization complete. Unique ability unlocked, Echo Harvest. Rowan froze. A system? In the original novel, there was no system. The world of Alarion ran on hard work, bloodlines, and ancient artifacts. This was an anomaly, a glitch in the narrative. He focused on the floating, translucent window, his heart hammering against his ribs.
Echo Harvest, Rank Divine, Growth. The power to witness the essence of a soul's movement. By observing a skill, spell, or technique, the user can harvest an echo of that ability, permanently integrating a portion of that power into their own soul.
Rowan's breath hitched. This wasn't just a survival tool, it was a cheat code.
In a world where the strong get stronger and the weak are trampled, Rowan had just been handed the ultimate key.
He didn't need to spend decades in a monastery or be born with a special bloodline. He just needed to watch. He needed to be a witness to greatness to steal it for himself. However, the realization of his power came with a grim reminder. To harvest a powerful skill, he had to see someone powerful use it.
And right now, the only powerful people nearby were the bandits coming to slit his throat.
Rowan knew he couldn't stay. He couldn't fight them, not yet.
He took what little copper he had, abandoned his post, and slipped into the shadows of the forest just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. Behind him, as he fled toward the capital, he heard the first screams.
The Night of Red Steel had begun, but for the first time in history, Rowan Vale wasn't one of the corpses left behind.
The journey to the capital, Oakhaven, was a grueling test of endurance.
Rowan had to avoid main roads, scavenge for berries, and hide from wild beasts that shouldn't even exist in the early chapters. But he had a goal. In the novel, the capital was about to host a grand event, not a celebration, but a tragedy.
It was a moment that every reader of The Last Hero of Illyrian remembered because it marked the end of the golden age of swordsmanship.
Arriving at Oakhaven, Rowan was struck by the sheer scale of the city. Towering white stone walls, banners of the Sun King snapping in the wind, and thousands of people bustling through the streets. To them, he was just another beggar, another face in the crowd, but Rowan headed straight for the execution square.
The atmosphere in the square was heavy, suffocating. Thousands had gathered, but the silence was deafening.
Standing on the high stone platform was a man bound in heavy, mana-suppressing chains. He was Darius Crow, known as the Bladed Eclipse. In the lore of the book, Darius was the greatest swordsman of the generation, a man who could split a mountain with a wooden stick. He had been framed for treason by the corrupt High Council, and today was the day his legend was supposed to end. In the original story, Darius dies silently, a martyr whose death triggers a civil war that the hero eventually resolves. But Rowan knew something the crowd didn't. Darius Crow wouldn't go out quietly. He was waiting for one final moment to show the world the pinnacle of his art.
As the executioner raised the heavy obsidian axe, Darius Crow looked up. Even with his mana suppressed, his eyes burned with a terrifying intensity.
Rowan pushed through the crowd, ignoring the shoves and curses of the townspeople until he was at the very front, his eyes locked onto the condemned man. "Watch me," Rowan whispered to himself, his vision narrowing. "Show me the skill that the hero was never meant to learn."
Suddenly, Darius moved. It shouldn't have been possible. The chains were supposed to be unbreakable.
But with a roar that shook the very foundations of the square, Darius didn't break the chains. He used his own life force to ignite his blood. For a split second, the air around him turned into a vortex of invisible blades. This was his forbidden technique, the heaven-severing draw. It happened in the blink of an eye, a flash of light so bright it blinded the guards. The executioner's axe shattered into dust. The platform itself was cleaved in two by a force that defied gravity. Darius Crow fell, his heart finally stopping, but he died with a smile.
Having proven that no chain could hold a true master, the crowd erupted in chaos, guards rushing forward to cover up the embarrassment. But amidst the screaming and the stampeding people, Rowan stood frozen. His eyes were bloodshot, and his head felt like it was being split open.
Echo Harvest triggered! Observation complete. The heaven-severing draw. Mythic rank. Error. User's body is too weak to contain the full echo. Filtering, extracting 1% of the essence. New skill acquired, faint trace of the severing wind.
A surge of heat rushed through Rowan's veins. His scrawny arms suddenly felt denser, his senses sharpened, and he could feel the flow of the wind.
Against his skin, as if it were a physical object. He had done it. He had stolen a fragment of a legend.
But as Rowan tried to slip away into the back alleys to process his new power, he felt a cold shiver down his spine.
He wasn't the only one who had been watching the execution with unusual interest.
From a high balcony overlooking the square, a figure draped in a pitch-black cloak narrowed their eyes. This was a member of the Veil, an organization that didn't appear until much later in the novel. They were the balance keepers of the world, and they were sensitive to any fluctuations in the laws of reality. Rowan had just used a forbidden ability to steal a forbidden skill in broad daylight. He was no longer just a nameless extra, he was a target. As the bells of the capital tolled, signaling the death of the bladed eclipse, Rowan realized that his survival had just become much more complicated. He wasn't just fighting the plot anymore, he was fighting the world itself. He needed more power. He needed to find the others who were destined to fall, and he needed to take their strength before they vanished into the pages of history. The path ahead was dark, filled with monsters, corrupt heroes, and secrets that the original author never dared to write. But as Rowan vanished into the shadows of the capital, a small, determined smirk played on his lips.
Kale Draven, he muttered, thinking of the hero who was currently lounging in a palace, unaware of the change in the world.
Enjoy your destiny while you can, because I'm coming for your skills next. The journey from a lowly warehouse guard to a man who could shake the foundations of destiny did not happen overnight. For Rowan Vale, every step away from the capital was a step into a reality far grimmer than the pages of The Last Hero of Valerion had ever suggested. The city of Black Hollow was his first true test. Built into the literal intestines of a mountain, it was a place where the sun never reached and the law was a foreign concept. Here, Rowan wasn't just a nameless extra. He was a ghost in the making. It was in the flickering bioluminescent glow of the lower slums that he met Lyra Ashwind. She was a whirlwind of silver hair and calculated desperation, a thief who didn't just steal purses, she stole secrets. When she first tried to lift Rowan's meager coin pouch, his hand moved with the practiced, lethal grace of the late Darius Crow. The Echo Harvest had begun to change his muscle memory, turning his clumsy NPC limbs into the instruments of a master swordsman.
"You're not a guard," Lyra had hissed, her daggers pressed against his throat, while his hand gripped her wrist.
Guards have a certain smell. You smell like someone who shouldn't exist. They formed a pact born of necessity. Lyra needed a sword to reach the deeper vaults of the black market, and Rowan needed a guide who understood the world's underbelly. Together, they navigated the labyrinthine politics of the underground, but Rowan's mind was always elsewhere. He was waiting for the hero. In the novel, Kale Draven was the epitome of virtue, a golden-haired savior who rose from nothing to defeat the Demon King. But when the hero finally made his entrance into the black market, not to save souls, but to purchase a prohibited soul-binding relic, Rowan saw the truth. Kale Draven didn't look at the people around him as lives to be saved. He looked at them as obstacles or resources. Rowan watched from the rafters as Kale struck down a merchant who dared to haggle, his face a mask of bored indifference. "Is that your savior?" Lyra whispered, sensing Rowan's mounting fury. "He's a monster in a saint's skin," Rowan replied. It was the first time he realized the destiny he had read about was a lie written by the winners. If Kale was the light, then the world needed a darkness deep enough to swallow him. To find that darkness, Rowan and Lyra followed a trail of ancient whispers to the ruins of forgotten kings. The air in the ruins was thick with the scent of ozone and ancient dust. It was here that Rowan faced his first unscripted calamity, a chimera gargoyle that had never appeared in the novel.
The battle was a desperate dance of survival. Rowan's Echo Harvest struggled to process the beast's movements. Every strike he took felt like his bones were being ground into powder.
But as the beast lunged, Rowan didn't just dodge. He absorbed. He felt the creature's essence, a primal, unyielding rigidity.
Skill acquired, Stone Skin, rank B. His skin grayed, hardening into a layer of impenetrable mineral.
The beast's claws scraped harmlessly against his chest, and with a roar that echoed with the voices of a dozen stolen souls,
Rowan drove his blade through the monster's core. However, the victory came with a terrifying price. As the monster died, its final moments of hunger and rage flooded Rowan's mind. He fell to his knees, clutching his head.
He could hear Darius Crow's last thoughts on the execution block, the merchant's greed from the market, and now the mindless hunger of the gargoyle.
They weren't just memories, they were stains on his soul. Rowan, your eyes, Lyra's voice was trembling. They're turning black.
he pushed her away, his own voice sounding like a chorus of strangers. "I'm fine. We have to move." But they weren't moving fast enough. The Veil had arrived. The Veil was an organization of silent arbiters, men and women who wore masks of white porcelain and moved with a synchronicity that suggested a hive mind.
They were the cleaners of the world, the ones who ensured the script of history remained on track. To them, Rowan was a glitch, a virus that needed to be purged. The pursuit lasted for weeks across the frozen tundras of the north. Rowan and Lyra were hunted like animals. Each encounter with a Veil Hunter forced Rowan to use Echo Harvest more aggressively. He stole the speed of a wind mage, the precision of an elven archer, and the cruelty of a dark priest. With every theft, Rowan Veil the person faded, replaced by a composite of the powerful dead. The turning point came in a submerged temple dedicated to a forgotten god. There, etched into the walls, was the true history of their world. This world was a cycle, a repeating play. The hero, the demon king, the war, it had all happened 7 times before. And in every cycle, there was a harvester, an anomaly meant to balance the hero's ego. Each time, the harvester had been hunted down by the hero and the Veil, and each time their death triggered the Great Reset, destroying the world to start the story anew. "I'm not a character," Rowan realized, his fingers tracing the ancient carvings. "I'm the failsafe, and Kale Draven knows." The revelation was interrupted by the smell of smoke and the sound of steel.
One of their few allies, a mercenary they had saved in the ruins, had sold them out for a pardon from the crown. The temple was surrounded.
In the chaos that followed, the sky above the tundra bled a deep, sickly crimson. The Veil didn't want Rowan, they wanted him dead, and they didn't care who else died in the process.
Lyra, trying to buy Rowan time to stabilize his overflowing mana, was struck by a piercing light spell, a signature move of the Heroes Party.
Rowan watched in slow motion as she fell, her silver hair stained with blood. The woman who had taught him that this world was more than just a book, the only person who saw Rowan and not the skills he possessed, was dying in the dirt. Something inside Rowan snapped. It wasn't the Echo Harvest activating, it was something deeper, something primal.
The voices in his head stopped screaming. They began to chant.
"You want a monster?" Rowan whispered, his voice vibrating with a power that cracked the stone floor beneath him. "I will give you a calamity." He didn't just copy the skills of the surrounding Veil Hunters, he consumed them. Their mana, their life force, their very existence was sucked into his vortex. The white masks of the hunters shattered as they collapsed into husks. The sky didn't just turn red, it tore open. A voice, ancient and cold, resonated through the atmosphere, heard by every king, peasant, and hero across the continent.
The 8th calamity has awakened. The script is broken.
Rowan stood over Lyra's body, his aura a swirling vortex of shadows and stolen light. He looked toward the horizon, toward the capital where Kael Draven sat on a throne of lies. Rowan was no longer the weakest NPC. He was no longer a reader. He was the end of the book. "Wait for me, Kael," Rowan murmured, his eyes now a void of endless darkness. "I'm not just coming for your skills anymore. I'm coming for the world you think you own." As the first snow began to fall, dyed red by the sky, the weakest NPC stepped out of the ruins. Leaving behind the man he used to be and embracing the god of ruin he was destined to become. The hunt was over. The war of the end had begun. The red snow crunched beneath Rowan's boots, each step echoing like a funeral knell through the desolate valley. The transformation wasn't merely physical, it was an existential overhaul. Inside his mind, the silence he once cherished was gone, replaced by a roaring sea of memories that weren't his own. He could feel Darius Crow's iron-willed discipline clashing with the feral, predatory hunger of the stone-skinned beast. He could feel the desperate, dying gasps of every soldier he had encountered. He was no longer a single soul. He was a graveyard of legacies.
The eighth calamity wasn't just a title given by the heavens, it was a cosmic error that the world was now trying to purge. Rowan looked at his hands, where black veins pulsed with a rhythmic, ethereal light. With a flick of his wrist, he didn't just manifest the blade, he summoned the very concept of the last breath technique he had stolen from the execution square. The air itself tore open, a rift of pure void following the trajectory of his hand.
This was the power the novel had never mentioned, the power to unmake the narrative itself.
As Rowan moved toward the border of the kingdom of Ilarion, the world around him began to warp. The system messages that once guided him were now flickering, distorted by static. Warning! The narrative integrity compromised. Error! The protagonist's fate is no longer guaranteed. Rowan smirked, a cold, hollow expression. The system, the author of this world, was afraid. He was a virus in a perfectly curated story. His first destination was the Iron Fortress of Valerius, the stronghold where Lyra was being held by the Veil. This wasn't a stealth mission anymore. The time for hiding in shadows, for being the weakest NPC, was over. As he approached the towering granite walls, the alarms blared, a sound of pure panic. The Veil's elite hunters, men and women who had spent decades mastering the holy arts, stood atop the ramparts. Their eyes were wide with a terror they couldn't name. To them, Rowan didn't look like a man, he looked like a walking eclipse.
"Halt, abomination!" a commander shouted, his voice cracking. He unleashed a barrage of golden light, the judgment of the sun.
A high-tier spell meant to incinerate demons. Rowan didn't dodge, he didn't use stone skin. He simply reached out and pulled. Ability detected! Judgment of the Sun! Echo Harvest Evolution! Eternal Eclipse! The golden light didn't hit him. It was absorbed into his palm, turning from a brilliant yellow to a suffocating, necrotic purple. Rowan felt the commander's years of training, his devotion to the sun god, and his love for his family in the capital. It all flowed into Rowan like bitter wine. Then, with a roar that shook the very foundations of the earth, Rowan reflected the attack. The eternal eclipse obliterated the fortress gates and turned the stone to glass. He walked through the flames, untouched. Deep within the dungeons, he found Lyra. She was chained with mana-suppressing shackles, her face pale and bruised. But when she looked up and saw him, she didn't smile. She recoiled.
The Rowan she knew, the quiet, observant man who shared bread with her in the gutters of Black Hollow, was buried under a mountain of stolen shadows.
"Rowan?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What did you do to yourself?" "I survived, Lyra!" he replied, his voice sounding like multiple people speaking in unison. He touched the shackles, and they didn't just break, they dissolved into dust as he drained the enchantments right out of them.
I'm taking you out of here, and then I'm going to find Kel.
You can't, she pleaded, grabbing his arm. Her touch felt like a freezing brand against his corrupted skin.
The Veil! They aren't the ones in charge anymore. Kale has changed. Ever since the sky turned red, he's been consuming the other heroes. He's not the savior the prophecy spoke of. He's something else.
Rowan paused. The original novel, The Last Hero of Ilarion, was a story of light overcoming darkness.
But he had ripped the script apart. By becoming the 8th calamity, he had forced the hero to evolve into something equally monstrous to compensate.
The narrative was trying to balance itself, turning the protagonist into a tyrant to match the new antagonist.
Leaving the burning fortress behind, Rowan and Lyra traveled through a world in collapse. The red snow continued to fall, blighting the crops and driving the livestock mad. Everywhere they went, Rowan saw the glitches. People who should have been important NPCs were fading into gray mist, their roles rendered obsolete by his presence. One night, while camping in the Whispering Woods, Rowan felt a presence he hadn't sensed before. It wasn't the hostile aura of the Veil, or the arrogant heat of Kale Draven. It was something ancient, something that smelled of old paper and dried ink. An old man appeared by their fire, dressed in rags that seemed to be made of literal parchment. He was the Chronicler, a character that only appeared in the secret epilogue of the original novel, a meta-commentary entity meant to record the end of the world.
You weren't supposed to be here, Rowan Vale, the chronicler said, his eyes scanning Rowan as if reading a page.
You were meant to die in Chapter 1, a footnote, a spark to start a fire, but you stole the fire for yourself.
The story was a lie, Rowan spat, the voices of the 7 previous calamities whispering in his ear, urging him to kill the old man and take his knowledge.
The hero is a monster. The gods are vultures. Why should I follow a script written by someone who hated me?
The chronicler sighed, a sound like a closing book. There have been 7 others who thought they could rewrite the ending.
All of them became the very thing they fought. Look at yourself. You are stealing the lives of everyone you touch.
How long until there is no Rowan left? How long until you are just a vessel for everyone else's tragedies?
Rowan looked into the fire. He saw the faces of those he had harvested. Darius Crow's face was the clearest, the man who had been framed and executed. Rowan realized that he wasn't just taking their power, he was carrying their unresolved regrets.
If I am to be the calamity, Rowan said, his gaze hardening, then I will be the last one. I won't just kill the hero.
I will kill the system that created him. The chronicler chuckled sadly. To do that, you must go to the origin point.
The World Tree, Yggdrasil's echo. That is where the hero is gathering the 7 relics of the sun.
If he completes the ritual, he will reset the world, erasing everyone, including you and that girl, to start a perfect story from chapter 1.
The stakes were finally clear. This wasn't just a battle for survival or revenge. It was a battle for the right to exist. If Kale succeeded, the world would loop back, and Rowan would die again as a nameless warehouse guard, trapped in an eternal cycle of misery. Finally, the Great World Tree appeared on the horizon, a gargantuan structure of light and wood that pierced the very heavens. Around it, Kale Draven's army was gathered. Tens of thousands of knights, mages, and mythical beasts stood ready. And at the center of it all, bathed in a blinding artificial radiance, stood Kale. He wore the golden armor of Ilarion, but his eyes were vacant, glowing with the white-hot intensity of a puppet being controlled by the world's will.
Kale raised the holy sword, and the sound of 1,000 trumpets filled the air.
The bug has arrived! Kale's voice boomed, devoid of all emotion. The system will now initiate the deletion process. Rowan looked at the massive army, then at the hero who was nothing more than a scripted tool. He felt the darkness within him surge, the legacies of the fallen screaming for justice. He reached out his hand, and for the first time, he didn't just target a person, he targeted the sky. There is no hero here. Rowan's voice resonated with the power of the 8th calamity. There is only a reader who finished the book and didn't like the ending. Today, I'm tearing out the last page. The weakest NPC took a step forward, and the world itself began to scream. The final confrontation was no longer a dream. It was a nightmare that the world would never forget. The crimson sky did not just herald a change in weather, it signaled the death of the script. For the first time in the history of Ilarion, the ink was running dry and the pages were tearing themselves apart.
Rowan Vale stood at the epicenter of this metaphysical collapse.
His body no longer feeling like flesh and bone, but rather a vessel for 1,000 stolen lifetimes.
Chapter 11, The Symphony of the Damned.
The awakening of the 8th calamity brought with it a price Rowan hadn't anticipated. Silence was now impossible. Within his mind, the Echo Harvest had evolved from a mere skill copying tool into a living, breathing necropolis.
He didn't just have Darius Crow's sword techniques, he had Darius's grief for his executed family.
He didn't just have the stone skin of the mountain beast. He felt the ancient, crushing loneliness of a creature that had lived for centuries in the dark. As Rowan looked at his hands, they flickered.
For a split second, they weren't his hands, they were the calloused hands of a blacksmith. Then, the delicate fingers of a mage. Then, the claws of a monster.
Rowan? Lyra's voice was a fragile thread of sanity in the howling wind. She stepped back, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and primal terror.
To her, the man who had just saved her didn't look human anymore. A dark, viscous aura leaked from his pores, staining the ground black.
Every blade of grass he stepped on didn't just wither, it vanished from existence, as if the memory of it had been erased.
I can hear them all, Lyra whispered, his voice overlapping with 3 different tones.
The ones the hero killed, the ones the veil silenced, they aren't just skills, they are witnesses, and they want their turn to speak.
Chapter 12. The Erasure of the Adjudicators. The veil did not wait. Sensing the awakening of the calamity, they sent their ultimate deterrent, the Adjudicators.
These were not mere hunters. They were entities outside the narrative, tasked with editing any anomalies that threatened the story's conclusion.
3 figures descended from the crimson clouds, clad in armor made of white marble that seemed to repel the very air around them.
Anomaly identified. Rowan Vale, the lead adjudicator, spoke in a voice that sounded like grinding parchment. You are a stain on the manuscript. We are here to apply the bleach.
In the original novel, the adjudicators were the secret bosses that even Cale Draven, the hero, feared to face.
They moved with conceptual speed. They didn't travel through space, they simply arrived at their destination because the script said they should.
One adjudicator raised a spear of pure light, aiming for Rowan's heart. In any other version of this world, the attack would have been instantaneous and fatal.
But Rowan didn't move. He didn't even blink. As the spear touched his chest, the echo harvest surged.
Warning, attempting to copy a non-entity skill. Override, 8th Calamity Protocol active. Skill stolen, narrative immunity.
The spear didn't pierce him. It shattered like glass against the brick wall. Rowan reached out and grabbed the adjudicator's throat.
The marble armor began to crack, turning black as Rowan's aura infected it. You call me a stain? Rowan's eyes glowed with a terrifying hollow light.
I am the one who realized this book is a tragedy, and if I'm going to be erased, I'm taking the ink with me. With a sickening crunch, Rowan didn't just kill the adjudicator, he absorbed him. The other 2 entities froze.
For the first time in their eternal existence, they felt a sensation not programmed into their beings. Fear.
They tried to retreat into the clouds, but Rowan snapped his fingers. The sky itself buckled.
The crimson clouds turned into a vortex, dragging the adjudicators down into the abyss of Rowan's shadow.
While Rowan was dismantling the enforcers of fate, Cale Draven, the golden hero, was experiencing something far worse than physical pain. He was losing his protagonist's grace.
In the capital's high palace, Cale drew his legendary sword, Aurelius, but the blade felt heavy. It felt ordinary.
The divine glow that usually surrounded him was flickering like a dying candle. He tried to summon his signature move, the heavenly sundering, but nothing happened.
Only a pathetic spark emerged from the tip of his blade. "What is happening to me?" Cale roared, throwing a golden goblet across the room.
A shadow moved in the corner. A high priest of the veil emerged, his face pale. The narrative is shifting, my lord. The world's essence is being diverted.
There is a new sun in the sky, and it is consuming all the light. Rowan Vale has become the main character of a story that is no longer being written.
He is improvising, and the world is following his lead. Cale's arrogance turned into a cold, murderous resolve.
He didn't care about the world or the script. He cared about his status. He had been promised a kingdom, a harem of princesses, and eternal glory.
He was the hero, and he would kill anyone, NPC or otherwise, who tried to take his spotlight.
"Prepare the legions," Cale commanded, his voice trembling with desperation. "I don't care if he's a calamity. I am the hero!"
I am the ending. If the world wants to scream, I'll give it a reason.
Chapter 14: The March Through the Wasteland. Rowan and Lyra began their journey toward the capital.
But the world they walked through was no longer the one from the novel. Because of the Eighth Calamity's presence, the boundaries between regions were collapsing. They walked through a forest that bled into a desert, past rivers that flowed upward into the sky.
Lyra noticed that Rowan was changing. He spent hours in silence, staring at things that weren't there. He was reading the air.
"Rowan, we should stop," Lyra said one evening as they camped near a floating ruin.
"You haven't slept in 3 days. You're starting to talk to yourself."
Rowan looked at her, and for a moment, his eyes cleared. "I'm not talking to myself, Lyra. I'm talking to the seventh calamity."
And the 6th. They're all here. They're telling me how they failed. They tried to fight the hero.
They tried to be villains, but that's what the script wanted. It wanted a hero to overcome a great evil.
He stood up, looking toward the distant lights of the capital. The only way to win is not to be the villain.
It's to destroy the stage itself.
He reached out his hand toward a nearby rock. Instead of shattering it, he simply willed it to be a bird.
The rock morphed, feathers sprouting from stone, and a crow flew away into the distorted night.
I'm no longer stealing skills, Rowan realized, a terrifying smile spreading across his face.
I'm stealing the authority of the author. Chapter 15, The Siege of Fate.
By the time Rowan reached the gates of the capital, he was followed by an army of glitch creatures, monsters, and NPCs that had been discarded by the story.
Now revitalized by Rowan's chaotic energy, the peasants who once feared the hero now looked at Rowan with a strange, hollow hope.
He wasn't a savior, but he was an end to their scripted misery. The capital walls were lined with thousands of soldiers, mages, and the remaining elite of the Vale. Kael Draven stood at the highest battlement, his golden armor polished to a blinding sheen, desperate to maintain the illusion of his divinity. Rowan Vale! Cal's voice was amplified by magic. You are nothing but a bug in the system, a nameless extra who forgot his place.
Fall on your knees and return what you've stolen, and perhaps I will grant you a quick death.
Rowan stood at the base of the massive wall, looking up at the hero. He looked small, a lone figure in a simple, dark coat.
But as he took a step forward, the earth didn't just shake, it unraveled. The stone of the walls began to turn into liquid, then into words, then into nothing.
Kael, Rowan's voice wasn't loud, yet it echoed in the mind of every person within 100 miles. You've spent your whole life reading your own legend.
But I've read the whole book. I know your secrets. I know your weaknesses. And most importantly, Rowan raised his hand, and the echoes of the 7 previous calamities manifested behind him, 7 towering shadows of pure resentment. I know how this story was supposed to end, and I'm here to tell you, I'm bored of it. The sky cracked open, not with thunder, but with the sound of a closing book. The final battle for the reality of Ilarion had begun, and for the first time, the hero was the one who was afraid of the dark. The golden aura surrounding Kael Draven flickered, his majestic armor, the legendary Aegis of the Sun, cracking under the weight of the oppressive pressure emanating from Rowan. For years, Kael had been the center of the universe, the chosen one whose path was paved with triumphs and divine favor. But now, staring into Rowan's eyes, he saw something that shouldn't exist in his world, a variable that the story could not control. You speak of boredom? Kael hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of holy rage and primal terror. You are a glitch, a mistake in the fabric of this world. I am the hero of Ilarion. I am the light that wards off the calamity.
Rowan didn't flinch. He stepped forward, the ground beneath his boots turning to ash as the echoes of the 7 followed his every move.
The light? No, Kale, you're just a puppet on a golden string. Every victory you had, every miraculous escape, it wasn't your strength.
It was the script, but me? I had to crawl through the dirt of a warehouse. I had to feel the cold steel of the executioner's blade.
I had to swallow the souls of the dead just to stay alive. I am the one who actually earned this power.
The battle erupted with the force of a collapsing star. Kale lunged, his sword Solaris carving a path of white-hot fire through the air.
In the novel, this strike was supposed to be unavoidable, a divine judgment that erased the enemy from existence, but Rowan didn't dodge. He reached out with a hand wreathed in the dark swirling mist of Echo Harvest. Skill activated, Abyssal Parry. Skill activated, Stone Skin perfected. The holy blade collided with Rowan's palm. The shockwave leveled the surrounding ruins, sending debris flying for miles.
Members of the Veil, the elite hunters who had tracked Rowan for so long, were vaporized instantly by the mere overflow of energy. Yet Rowan stood unmoved. The hero's ultimate attack didn't even draw blood. "My turn," Rowan whispered. He didn't use a sword. He used the very concept of the skills he had stolen.
He unleashed the shadow torrent of Darius Crow, amplified by the despair of the third calamity.
Thousands of blades made of pure darkness materialized, raining down on the hero.
Kale screamed as his divine protection was shredded like paper.
As the fight raged, Rowan felt the familiar tug of the echoes. The 7 calamities weren't just shadows. They were the remnants of people who, like him, had tried to break the cycle.
They were voices of poets, warriors, and kings who had been erased by the hero in previous iterations of the story.
Their rage became his focus. Their sorrow became his resolve.
"You think you're saving the world?" Rowan shouted over the roar of the magical storm.
The Veil and the hero, you don't save Ilarion, you reset it. Every time a calamity rises, you kill it to feed the world's mana, keeping the stagnant plague going forever. Well, I'm closing the theater.
Kale, desperate and bleeding, tapped into the final reserve of his power, the source of Ilarion. His eyes turned into blinding orbs of light. If I fall, this world ends. The story cannot exist without its protagonist.
Then let it be a new story, Rowan replied.
Rowan activated the true final form of Echo Harvest. He didn't target Kale's skills this time, he targeted the protagonist status itself. Warning, attempting to harvest the mandate of heaven. Warning, the system is resisting. Override initiated by the 8th calamity. A blinding flash of violet and crimson consumed the battlefield. For a moment, time stopped. Rowan saw the lines of fate, the literal text of the novel, floating in the air around them. He saw the scene where Lyra was supposed to die to motivate the hero. He saw the scene where the world was supposed to be reborn in fire. With a roar of defiance, Rowan reached out and tore the lines apart. The echoes of the Seven surged into him, lending him the strength to rewrite reality. The power of the hero was sucked into Rowan's vortex, leaving Kale Draven as nothing more than a terrified, ordinary man. The golden armor shattered, the holy sword turned to rust, and the mandate was extinguished. The sky, which had been a bleeding red, suddenly cleared into a deep natural indigo. The unnatural pressure vanished. The system messages that had plagued Rowan since his rebirth flickered and died. System error. Narrative thread lost. Status: free will achieved. Rowan fell to his knees, gasping for air. The echoes were gone, finally at peace. The weight of thousands of years of resentment had lifted. He looked at his hands. They were no longer glowing with stolen power. He was just Rowan again. But this time, he wasn't an NPC. He wasn't a villain. He was just him. In the distance, he saw a figure limping through the dust. It was Lyra. She was bruised and exhausted, but she was alive. The script that demanded her death had been burned to ashes. "Rowan," she called out, her voice shaky. He stood up, his legs trembling, and walked toward her. For the first time since waking up in this world, he didn't check his HUD. He didn't look for a quest marker. He didn't care about the hero's next move. The veil had been shattered. The hero was a broken man wandering the ruins. The world of the last hero of Ilarion was dead. In its place was a world that didn't know what would happen tomorrow. And to Rowan, that was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "It's over, Lyra," Rowan said, reaching her and offering his hand. "The book is closed." "What do we do now?" she asked, looking at the horizon where the sun was beginning to rise. A real sun, not a plot device. Rowan smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "Whatever we want. For the first time in my life, I don't know what happens in the next chapter." "And I can't wait to find out." Epilogue: The Unwritten Lands. Months passed. The kingdom of Elilarion struggled to adapt to a world without destiny. Wars broke out, then ceased. New leaders rose, not because they were chosen by gods, but because they earned the trust of the people. Rowan and Lyra traveled to the far reaches of the continent, far away from the politics of the capital. Rowan still had his strength, but he used it sparingly, no longer needing to steal to survive. He had become a legend, the Nameless Guardian, a man who appeared when the weak were oppressed and vanished before any songs could be written about him. He often sat by the campfire at night, looking at the stars.
He still remembered the life of Kai Ren, the reader who died in a mundane accident.
He realized now that he hadn't been sent to this world to follow a story, but to end one. He was the weakest NPC who became the strongest force of change, proving that even a single line of extra dialogue can rewrite the entire universe if given the chance. The world was no longer a novel, it was life, and life was messy, unpredictable, and perfect. And that, my friends, is the end of Rowan Vale's journey, from a doomed warehouse guard to the man who broke the cycle of fate. A story that reminds us that no matter how small our role might seem, we are the authors of our own destiny. If you enjoyed this epic journey of Reborn as the weakest NPC, but I can steal the hero's skills, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. We've got plenty more Isekai adventures, deep dives into hidden gems, and epic zero-to-hero stories coming your way. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter. What did you think of the ending? Should Rowan have taken the hero's place, or was he right to destroy the system entirely? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and remember, don't just follow the script, write your own. See you in the next video.